Welcome to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. In this series, we dive into the role of Chief of Staff, exploring how it can be a game changer and pivotal player on your leadership team. You'll get a backstage pass and learn about the different aspects of the role and what it takes to excel in it. We'll hear from some incredible guests who have firsthand experience serving as Chief of Staff or collaborating with one on their team. And don't forget, the Chief of Staff isn't just a title or person, it represents a leadership philosophy. Leveraging leadership is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. We are continuing our Chief of Staff series, and I am so happy to be joined by our guest, Natalie Crohn. She is a two-time Chief of Staff, which we'll get into in a little bit, and she's currently at Johns Hopkins. So, Natalie, thank you so much for being on. How's your week going so far?
Hey, Emily, thank you so much for having me. It's going well. It's going well for a Monday. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Excited to have you. So get us caught up a little bit. So tell us about your background and maybe start with, where'd you grow up?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Indiana, in Bloomington. So if you're familiar with IU basketball, that's, the heart of Indiana Hoosiers. So born and raised there. I did move away a little bit for a couple of years when I went to grad school. And then after that came back in Indiana's home. So a little bit about a background for myself. I actually started my career in social work. I got my bachelor's and master's both in social work with a focus in geriatrics. That led to I started out my career actually working at the Alzheimer's Association, which I loved. And then from there, I ended up getting a really great opportunity at a geriatric care management company and was there for about 3 years and did a lot of content creation, getting ready for geriatric care managers to go into the field and kind of have those active care plans with their clients. And unfortunately, after about 3 years, that company ceased. So I ended up getting into some IT consulting. One of the leaders that was at that company ended up going to a different company and had reached back out to me and said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity. Do you want to come work with me again?" And it ended up being great. I thought, this is a little out of my wheelhouse, but I'm going to try it. So I did some consulting for a few years and found that I really missed the healthcare side of things. But that's really where my role kind of switched from social work into more of what I call morphed into project management. And so I decided, you know what, I really miss healthcare. And so then from there, I got a job working at a biopharmaceutical manufacturing company, Catalent, if you're familiar with that. So I worked there for a couple years, about 3 years as a project manager. And then I went to another company, Magellan Health, and that's where my role kind of really expanded into this chief of staff. So I started there as a senior project manager, worked there for a couple of years. My leader at the time, who I actually am privileged to work with again today, she got promoted in her role. So she was taking on more responsibility, additional scope, and she basically was like, hey, are you interested in, expanding your role into more of a strategic type role instead of just, project management type work? And so I'm always up for learning new things and trying new things. And so I said, sure, let's try it out, adding more tools to my tool belt. So that was, 3 years ago when that happened. And so that's where my role kind of morphed from that project management more up to that strategic chief of staff type role. And then about a year and a half ago, I got the job that I'm in now at Johns Hopkins Health Plans, and I'm actually supporting my leader, the same one that I had at my previous company. So her and I work great together, and she's just a phenomenal leader. I'm really, really lucky to have to work with her.
So you worked with her twice at 2 different companies, and it sounds like you're in kind of the project management world and she noticed something and said, hey, do you want to take a more strategic role? So just for that first instance of chief of staff and that first transition, what caught her attention, or did you know her before? Or how did that role, was that the very first role the company had as chief of staff?
Great. Yeah, great questions. So no, I did not know her before. It was one of those relationships. We just worked really well together.
Yeah.
She's a very visionary leader. And I think what she saw in me, my organizational skills, my communication, just being able to connect with others and build that rapport. And I think just that combination of being able to execute out on a lot of those things that she, kind of set her vision for at that company. I was, kind of her right hand and was able to, really execute out on that.
Yeah. And then, so, and walk me through the transition between the two chiefs of staff roles. So, did your leader go first and then say, hey, I'm at this new company and do you want to be my chief of staff here? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So she did leave first. I was sad. So she went got a great opportunity at Johns Hopkins, and so we were apart for about a year and a half actually, and we
Okay.
stayed in contact. We would have monthly
Yeah.
coffee chats, and we ended up developing a really great friendship as well. So we stayed in contact, and yeah, she reached back out to me and was like, "Hey, I really need you, and would you be interested in coming to work with me again?" And I was like, "Absolutely." I mean, she's one of those leaders that I always tease her and say I would follow her anywhere because
Isn't
she's
it great
just
when someone says, hey, I really need you. Can you come?
yeah, totally. And I'm just like, okay, when can I start?
Yeah.
But it worked out great. And so yeah, just really happy that we were able to, our paths crossed again, in a professional manner, which was great.
Yeah. That's why, listener, you keep in touch with people, you network, you don't burn bridges. Like it's a small
Oh,
world. So,
so true. It really, really is. You're absolutely right on that, Emily.
and so tell me about were there similarities between the jobs? Where like, oh, like I've done this before. Like I know how to do this part of chief of staff. And somewhere it was like, whoa, okay, this is way different company, different team. Tell me about the comparison.
Yeah. So I think for me in the beginning, it was, just like with any job, there's a learning curve, obviously. And so it was, learning about the business. It was similar, but it was, obviously different. And so new players, new team. So it was just kind of that first few, 6 months or so, it was kind of feeling my way around, who's who and, who do I go to for this? And, what's this person and this team responsible for? And so it was just kind of like feeling my way around and learning and just taking it all in. And then, yeah, a lot of it, so many similarities. I mean, obviously, it was a learning jump for me, which is one of my strengths actually, which I'll probably talk about later. But so it was very motivating for me to learn all these new things. And but I leaned back into the things that I learned at my previous role with her. And I think what helped me honestly most is I knew her style. I knew
Yeah.
what she needed, what she wanted, what she's looking for. And you just, it's that part of that chief of staff principal relationship where you just learn what their style is and you're able to, kind of hone in on that. And so I think that was really helpful for me having worked with her before. I wasn't trying to come in brand new,
Yeah.
learning, working with a new leader and trying to figure out, their leadership style and how they do things. I was already accustomed to that. And so I think that was really helpful for me and beneficial with the transition because I knew her. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of learning, to be done and kind of figuring out where things are at and what needed my attention versus just kind of understanding what her priorities were at the time. So
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And when new chiefs of staff come in, I have chiefs of staff who it's a new role entirely at that company. They don't know their principal. They don't know the company or industry or like the internal, and it's just like this. It's a tall task, right? So I think you had at least one piece or advantage in there where you knew your principal and you knew her work style. And I was wondering, because you knew that, and you were still learning the rest of the leadership team and your colleagues and all of the rest, but could you translate what your leader was saying to others right away and like help them understand? Here's what she wants to have happen there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like so much of my role is a lot of that. I mean, even today, it's being able to translate, okay, here's what I know she's looking for, and thinking about it in a different way to help them see things like, this is maybe, have we thought about doing it this way? Or, this is, she's empowering us to really, come up with this, whatever that deliverable is. And so it's a lot of taking what I know is kind of in her head and being able to translate that to the team so that they're able to also, see what she's looking for. So yeah, I think that's a big piece of my role.
And I know she's really big on, self-development and self-awareness and all these things. And one of the first things in our interactions, which you sent me your Clifton Strengths profile, said here and learning was at the top, which I was like, this is
Yeah.
not surprising at all. So tell me a little bit about how those types of assessments are used in your org.
Yeah. I love all those like assessment type stuff, but this one was probably honestly one of my favorites because it honestly was just really insightful for me, because of my different career paths that I took that I was kind of alluding to earlier. I honestly, for the last, I don't know, 10 years, I thought I was kind of weird. I was like, oh my gosh, this person, I started out in social work and then I went into like IT and then project management and now this like, strategic type role. And so, I always kind of thought that I was the weird one and I didn't embrace that. And so, one of the things that the Clifton Strengths Assessment, which we completed as a leadership team in January of this year, what I got out of that was that's who I am. Like it really made sense to me. And so it takes the assessment takes what your top, um, strengths are as far as like executing and communicating and relationship building and strategic thinking and like all those kind of different domains. And it kind of ranks you. Okay, what are you innately really good at versus, what are your, they call them navigation areas. So it's like, the kind of development opportunities. And it helps you see that it's okay that you're not good at those, but you learn to lean into what you're really, really good at. And so when I filled it out and I got my results back as learner and I was reading kind of what that meant, it was just like a light bulb went off for me. I was like, my life makes sense now. Like that motivates me to learn new things. And so it just made sense like why I kind of switched paths into my career kind of earlier on and kind of got me to where I am today because I love to learn. I'm always like, reading leadership books and listening to podcasts, and things like that. And so it was just so insightful. So what I appreciate about my leader is she really also is all about, helping us lean into our strengths and helping us not just to understand them, but also to use them. And so we talk a lot about the strengths as a leadership team. And actually, one of the things that she implemented about a little over a year ago, was something we call Coaching Fridays. And so it's a forum that she created where the leaders come and we practice our coaching with, whether it's challenging situations or, executive presence or strategic thinking. I mean, the whole topics just kind of range, but it's a safe space for the team to come together and kind of really hone in on those strengths and those skills so that they can take that away and apply them on their team and kind of help empower and grow their team as well. So it's been a really great journey for that. We like I said, she started it over a year ago, and so it's something that I've stepped into and kind of am facilitating.
So just to
Now.
jump in, I'm really interested in that piece. So is that, you said every Friday, and is it like an hour long? Does someone lead it? Is there a question or topic?
Yeah, great question. So it's every other week for an hour. And so I typically lead it, but we do a lot of like breakout sessions where we do a lot of self awareness exercises like, gosh, I'm trying to think of a couple we did, like understanding your why. And we practice a lot of like active listening. And we did one on like spheres of influence and like, figuring out what things you can control versus what things you can't control and learning to let go of those things that you can't control. And so so yeah, it's basically I took a survey of our leadership team and I'm like, hey, what's important to you? What do you want to get out of these Coaching Friday sessions? Like what topics do you want to, talk through and kind of learn and kind of practice on? And so that survey, came back and got a lot of great feedback on, hey, I want to learn about this, or can we talk about this? And randomly I'll get like, an IM or an email like, hey, can we add this topic to Coaching Friday? And so it's been great because it's very interactive. Usually the format of it, like I spend like, the first like 10 minutes just introing the topic, kind of what it is, why it's important in leadership. And then we usually have some sort of a breakout session where we get into smaller groups and kind of coach each other and practice those coaching skills so that they can ultimately take that away and use it with their teams.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I think it's amazing that you and your leader and your team have dedicated that time to do these things. And it sounds like, is it with your leadership team? Is it open to any member of the leadership team? Is it
It's actually,
awesome?
yeah, it's anybody that's a people manager. So it's her direct leadership team, and then there's some managers as well that also have direct reports, and so they come as well. So
Very
um, yeah, it's been great, and I will say that we as a team make this a priority. We have the support from our leadership, like, hey, we want you to prioritize this. It's development opportunities. It's a way to be a better leader. And so I appreciate that we as an organization and we as a team really prioritize that for the leadership team.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear about Coaching Friday. Just like my ears perked up when I was like, what? What is that?
Yeah,
Sounds
yeah,
amazing. And then,
yeah.
Clifton Strengths and there's others. I did DISC for the first time, the DISC assessment.
Oh, yeah, I
And
did that too. Did
yeah,
you
and
like
I
it?
thought of myself as weird as well. I was like, I'm kind of like this ragtag, like have all these different experiences and they don't, it's kind of like the island of misfit toys is where I live,
Yeah.
but it really distilled down, okay, here's your strengths, here's your communication style, here's your work style, here's how you can think about working and interacting with other styles. And it just
Exactly.
kind of put a frame around it, like, oh, okay, it's the same information, but it's just situated in such a way that it makes sense now. And I
Yeah.
can resonate with what you said, where it's like, oh, I get it, like it makes sense now. So
Yeah. I
I would
totally
recommend,
agree with
yeah.
you.
I remember I did a disc assessment for our leadership team, and everyone was blown away. It was freakishly accurate.
Yeah.
Everyone was reading their description, was like, this is like my autobiography right here.
I
So
know.
I would,
It's so crazy
yeah.
how accurate those things are. I mean, they're just it amazes me.
Yeah, I would use them. I would use them for self-awareness and, um, one of the things that DISC does, I think Clifton does it too in its own way, but DISC does what's your natural style? So like, how do you show up like on the couch watching Netflix? And then what's
Uh-huh.
your adapted style, which is like, how do you show up at the office because you think that's how you need to show up to be successful? And it's not like a good or bad thing. It's just notice this gap because if it's high, or if it's a big gap, you're using a lot of energy. So just be aware of that and say, is it worth it me spending that energy? Sometimes it is because sometimes you're in a toxic environment or whatever that you have to do what you have to do. But sometimes it's like, oh, actually, no, I can cool my jets on that a bit and just show up as me and be more authentic, use less energy, and people respond to authentic people anyway. So
That's so true, Emily. Like, I actually was thinking about the disc years ago when I took it, and comparing that to the Clifton strengths. And we've talked a lot about authenticity, like within Coaching Fridays at our team. And one of the things that I remember talking about was like that natural, self versus that adaptive self. And it morphs into the whole authenticity stuff. And it's so important in leadership.
yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating.
I know that's big to you because you and your leader, I think, spoke at a panel at Johns Hopkins. I think it was an internal panel on authenticity. And so I was wondering, why that was such a big topic for you and your leader, and also what are the benefits of focusing on that, and what are some of the challenges of having people show up authentically in their work?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. So we did a women in leadership panel back in the summer at Johns Hopkins Health Plans, and so it was something that my leader, it was her idea. She wanted to really highlight, women in the workplace and the struggles that we face and the challenges that we face, and also being celebrated for who we are. And oftentimes you might exactly what you were saying earlier, Emily. Like, have you ever been told you should be more X, or less Y, whether it's, be more assertive or less emotional or, whatever, fill in the gaps. But, and it's like, why can't I just be myself, And so, um, we wanted to have a platform. We're really big on like culture and, diversity and inclusion. And so we were just like, it was the month of like celebrating women's history. And so we're like, this is, kind of a perfect opportunity. And so there was four of us on the panel. And yeah, it was just kind of an open conversation around, what does authenticity mean and how important is that in leadership and, especially being a woman in the workplace and, just being open and being vulnerable to sharing, hey, there's challenges that we face and, we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should talk about it and be open. That's how we can, kind of progress and, move forward. And so it was just a really, really insightful, the things that the panelists shared, because you figure out who you are, you learn about others and their struggles that they face. And, a lot of it's the same, same challenges, different workplaces or, things like that. And so it was just a really powerful forum to kind of raise awareness for that topic around just leaning into being your authentic self as a woman in the workplace. Because we do have a voice and we do matter, and it's being more acceptable to that, and women have a seat at the table, and we should be there. There's no reason
Absolutely.
why we can't, and so it's but there's a lot of struggles and challenges, obviously, to get there for a lot of women, and so just being open and talking about them, having that chance to just share those experiences with other women, it was really empowering. It was actually one of our larger events that we had as far as attendance wise. So it was definitely a topic that resonated with a lot of folks. And there was several men there. It wasn't just, it was open to anybody, not just the women.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think the authenticity conversation, the reaction I get from some people, not all people, but some people like, oh, that's soft. That's a nice to have. And it's like, hey, we talk about that gap between your natural and adaptive, how you self or style, how you show up. If you're having team members spend a whole bunch of energy filling that gap, they're not as productive in your organization. And they
Exactly.
also are probably not bringing up as creative or original ideas as they could if you allowed them to be a little bit more themselves because they're probably scared to. And so you're missing out
Exactly.
on like learning and development and product vision and all of those different things. And so I think as a chief of staff or a CEO or any leader, even if you don't officially lead a team, what are you doing to help people be authentic in the workplace and show up as just themselves? Not to say that people need to show up in their PJs right off of the
Right.
Netflix couch or whatever, but
Right.
there is some boundaries there. But and that doesn't mean you're not making people accountable or holding people accountable, but having them be comfortable when they show up and they're giving all the attention to the things you want them to give attention to. I think it sounds like you as chief of staff and your leader are very aware and kind of attuned to that. And I suspect that it helps you and the team.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's so interesting because we also want to create a safe space to fail and make mistakes because that's how we learn. And so it's being okay to fail and hey, I made a mistake and how I learned from this and so it just being able to be yourself and sharing, hey, if something pops up that um
I'll tell you a quick story though about
yeah.
that. So one of my fears that was reflected in my disc report, by the way, was I
Uh-huh.
don't like to be wrong and especially wrong in front of people. So I don't
Uh-huh.
like being quote unquote caught making a mistake. And so that was like my greatest fear, like a
Yeah.
visceral, like very deeply held fear.
Sure,
And so
yeah.
I would hide all of my when I made a mistake, I would try to hide it, or I would try to make it so I didn't make a mistake, or
Yeah.
do that. And what I found when I flipped the script on that, and I stood up in front of my team, I was leading the team meeting, and said, "Hey, here's something last week where I messed up, and here's what we're doing about it. And thanks, Jessica, for picking up the slack or catching that thing." I saw people's faces light up like,
Yeah,
oh, cool. Like, well, no problem. Cause I do this all the time. Or like, hey, don't worry. We got your back. It just changed the dynamic in that room in such a positive way. And I was like, whoa, like I've been trying
exactly.
to avoid that, my whole life. And there it is being really powerful in that moment. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
for
my,
sure.
that's one of my stories for it. But
Yeah, it's so true. And it's, being able to um, admit our mistakes. And like you said, it allows people to see we're all people and we all make mistakes and it's okay. And nobody's perfect. And so yeah, I totally agree with you, Emily, that being able to share those moments, you kind of develop that culture of, okay, yeah, like it's okay if I, made this mistake. We're a team, it's okay. We're gonna get through it.
and I think one of the measures of a chief of staff or like a success of a chief of staff or CEO is, are people allowed to make mistakes? Are they celebrated for it? And um, basically, do people rally? So if someone, oh, okay, so John like missed this, said that in the Slack channel. If people rally to him and like, okay, let me do this, let me help you this way. That's one culture. And like a blame game or pointing fingers, like no, it's not my fault, it's your fault, it's someone else's fault, it's
Yeah,
not mine. You can tell what kind of team you have just by those types of tells. Um,
absolutely. I
yeah.
agree.
Since you've been a chief of staff twice at two different organizations, what would you say to someone who's maybe going into that role for a first time or maybe a new company to get prepared to be a chief of staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would tell them, really develop a relationship with your leader or your principal that you're supporting. Get to know them, get to know what's important to them, what's important to the organization. Start developing those connections in that network, whether it's, the leadership staff or, the stakeholders that you're going to be working with. Developing that trust and that positive rapport, I think right out of the gate is so important for a new chief of staff. And just kind of learning the lay of the land and being yourself. And I think honestly asking a lot of questions. If you don't understand or if you don't know something, you don't understand something, it's okay to say, hey, can we meet offline and you can, tell me a little bit more about this? I would love to, hear more about it or whatever that the case may be. But just not being afraid to ask questions because ultimately it will only help you to become a better chief of staff and a better, positioning for you that you're supporting for your principal, your leader, the team as a whole. So yeah, I think that would probably be my advice and building those connections and those relationships are just so essential. I think that is just I always come back to that. I think it's all about relationship building and getting to know others, not just in a professional manner, but what do they like to do outside of work, and what's important to them, and just getting to hear more about who they are.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was an NBA coach talk about, when I get recruits on, I can't be asking them to do something for the first time on the practice court. Like when I'm yelling at them or blowing the whistle, it can't be the first thing they hear out of my mouth. And so when you were describing building relationships and asking questions, it kind of reminded me of that philosophy. But I think day
Yeah,
one as a chief of staff, you've got to build those connections and build up those relationships. That's like your job day one. So start early
exactly.
and often
Yeah.
with those. And you mentioned kind of asking questions and asking for all offline or one-on-one conversations. Is there anything else that you would suggest or you did yourself, maybe the first or second time you were chief of staff to help build those relationships?
I did a lot of one-on-ones, and it was kind of what I call like a discovery phase
Yeah.
where, what's important to you and what are your challenges? I wanted to hear where people's pain points were because that was an area for me that I could um start getting more information and drawing out of because then I started could see a theme like, hey, I've met with, several people, throughout the org and this pain point keeps, coming up. And that was good information. So, hey, maybe this is an area that we need to focus in on. Or, how can we better support you and your team, whether it's, talking with stakeholders and, customers and things like that. And so I think, having those, one-on-ones, whether, if it's formal or, meeting for coffee or having lunch or something, just, developing those one-on-one conversations and just kind of asking those questions was really, really valuable for me as I was kind of learning more about the role and about the business that I was in. And so I think that also is really helpful just to kind of have that discovery phase where you're just kind of asking a lot of questions and, where are the challenges that they see and that they, what keeps you up at night? What gives you heartburn? All those types of questions. I think those are always good to ask. So you can kind of get a better understanding of where there might be opportunities for improvement.
Yeah. And what I didn't hear in all of that is we're going to do this now. Now that I'm here, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. That's probably not your best bet going in there. But
Exactly.
yeah.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I know that after you get off the ground and you build these relationships, like you're being pulled in a million different directions. You've got competing priorities. You've got things that were high priority and now something's even higher type of thing. So what are some ways or tools that you use to kind of keep yourself on track and stay organized or manage your time?
Yeah, I'm a huge OneNote fan. My life is like in OneNote. I have like tabs for all my to-dos and reference information and, leadership type stuff. And so I'm a huge OneNote fan. So I would be in trouble if they lost access to that. But also my leader and I have a shared OneNote. And so
Oh,
it's a place where I keep track of her priorities and with her to-dos and her and I both have access to it. And so we can go in, it's real time, and see, hey, this is what's on the docket for this week or, whatever that looks like. And so I keep track of, my goals in OneNote. I keep track of our team goals, obviously the org goals, my leaders' goals. And so that helps to orient me like, okay, this is, is everything kind of tied back to this, making sure that we're, working on the right things. So that's been definitely helpful for me, with just kind of keeping everything organized. Another tool I love is PowerPoint. So I create a lot of, executive decks and preparing for leadership on sites and things like that. And so PowerPoint's kind of my go-to as far as, getting a summary ready and, what is my audience, what do they care about? What do I need to push to them so that they can make, business decisions off of things like that. So really love PowerPoint too. Outlook, obviously, probably a lot of chiefs of staff, they have the color coding, the organization piece, but basically, and within my to-do list, I prioritize. So every week I kind of look at, okay, here's my list of, let's say 10 things that I need to, that are on my plate. What are the top 3 things that I have to get done this week, or kind of, understanding that from my leader too, like what are her priorities? What do we need to make sure that we're moving on this week? And, coming up with a plan of, okay, here's how we're going to tackle that. So that's worked really great for her and I. But yeah, I would say OneNote is kind of my go-to for things like that. I definitely would be lost without it.
I know a lot of people like OneNote. Yeah, for sure. And then since you've worked with your leader twice now, are there any memorable requests that have come that are like, what is that? Or like, that's super challenging, or that sounds odd. Just any fun ones that's like, oh, I guess I'm chief of staff now. I guess I'm on point for that.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I would say that every day is different. And so it's a variety, some days my focus is on strategic type stuff and planning for, a leadership on site versus, the next day I might be kind of in the weeds a little bit more trying to figure out, okay, what is this data telling me and what's the story here? And so I think that's the uniqueness about the role that I love is, there's no 2 days that are the same. And so I'm constantly, doing different things or, figuring out a better ways, for improvement or efficiency wise. A lot of that comes to mind. And ultimately my goal as a chief of staff is I want to help the team and my leader to shine. And so how can I best put my, foot forward so that we can meet those objectives for our organization and for our team, and doing a lot of that, chief of staff strategic type stuff in order to prep them for that, so that we can meet our goals and kind of execute out on the vision.
You will definitely not be bored as chief of staff. I was talking
That
with
is so
someone who is
true.
thinking about the role, and I was like, why are you, thinking about going to a new role? And she was like, well, I just I get bored a lot and I just don't want to be bored. And I was like, chief of staff is for you.
That's your role. Exactly.
You can
It's so
say a
true.
lot of things about the chief of staff role. Boring is not one of them. So
Definitely not. Definitely not.
yeah,
No, I 100% agree.
very cool. So bonus question for you. If you could
Yeah.
create a chief of staff themed cocktail, what would some of the ingredients be?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. So my husband and I actually recently went out to dinner, and they had a like the holiday cocktail list out on their menu, and one of them was holiday sangria. And I used to not be a sangria fan, but this one had like, I don't know, 8 different ingredients in it, and it's so good. But it had it had wine, it had apple brandy in it, and it had like 4 different fruits in it. It had cinnamon and just this whole like concoction. It was so good, and it wasn't too sweet, which I was like, oh, it might be too sweet. But I would say a sangria type cocktail, because it has a little bit of everything in it, which kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. It's a variety. It's not just wine or just beer, or, whatever that.
A little bite to it too, not too
Yeah,
sweet.
exactly. Right. So I would have to go with maybe a sangria, just because of all the different things that make up that drink. And I think that's representative of what we are as chiefs of staff and the role
That's
we are.
an awesome answer. I'm going to end it on that one. So it's cheers, sangria. Cheers to you,
Cheers.
Natalie.
Yes,
Thank you
I
so
love
much
it.
for being on. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I know everyone will get a lot out of this conversation. So thank you once again. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for having me. I appreciate you too.
If you're not interested in gaining valuable knowledge and becoming a better leader, then by all means, don't subscribe. But if you're keen on becoming a highly knowledgeable, more successful and confident leader, then hit that subscribe button.